All right. So, does every mic work? Do you want to try them out quickly? So I just wanted to start, before even getting into the panel, with offering for each of you to introduce yourself the way you want to be introduced for this conversation. Because I can say your titles, I can say where you work or where you come from, but I'm honestly not sure that's what you want people to know about you when we get into this. But what about responsible AI? What are we missing? So Mohammed, if you want to start.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I'm very happy to be with you here in this nice city of Munich. I have been there for 12 years, and since then I haven't visited this city until now. So I'm really delighted to be with you here in this beautiful building, Amerikahaus. And if I have to introduce myself, I'm professor at Hassan II University in Casablanca in Morocco. I'm also the founder and the president of MoroccoAI. You can visit our website, morocco.ai, which is a non-profit organization that aims to promote AI in Morocco in the global south. And we have 5 main pillars, namely the first one is education, research, industry, society, and government. I have been also working for 3 years as an advisor to the Minister of Solidarity, Social Integration and Family. I was in charge of digital transformation in the social sector. And I've been also working for 2 years as a Chief Digital Officer of the university. And I've spent also 2 until 3 years as digital experts in the UNDP, United Nations Program Development. So this is a summary of my background.
It's a good summary. Thank you very much, Anne-Elisabeth, if you want to jump in.
Right, nice to see you all this morning. Very glad to be here and very thankful to the organizer for this invitation. My name is Anne-Elisabeth Corrier, and I am an associate professor at Nantes University in France, but I'm currently living in Atlanta and working at the Emory Center for Ethics as a visiting fellow. If I could define myself, I would say that I am a servant educator, trying to develop reflections on AI ethics and governance, and the way we can teach these to all generations, not just what we call in the US the K-12, but also how do we upskill and reskill.
Thank you very much. Professor Mack.
Thank you, Oksana. Very good morning, everyone. Thank you, Christoph, for inviting me up here. So I'm visiting Christoph at the moment. I might have the longest trip of all. I'm coming from Brisbane, Australia, so I'm based at the University of Queensland. I'm the inaugural chair in ethics at UQ, the first in Australia, to be honest. So my background is in ethics, business ethics, to be more specific. This is where Christoph and I met a very long time ago. I graduated with PhD in St. Gallen, so one of the early people in the business ethics school from St. Gallen, coming with a critical perspective to pretty much everything, groomed in Habermasian thinking, but over the years become much more pragmatic. And so initially, I have to say I stayed away from AI and ethics because I felt, not again. I have to, start a new discussion, and there's so much to talk about, and so many people contribute. But it is the defining debate of our time. And so I thought, okay, what if I engage? How would I do this? So for the past 2 or 3 years, we've actually started to build a center for applied ethics and we call it human technology, to put the human first. Looking at the interface, essentially, of leadership, governance, AI, and ethics. Also with a view to education, so how do we, instill the critical capabilities in future leaders, but essentially looking at the leadership angle. And in my comments, I'll, speak a little bit to this idea why I think AI is these days, at least, first and foremost, a leadership issue and not so much a technological issue. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Professor Lütke.
Maybe just a few thoughts about my development, how I came to AI and AI ethics. So my background is in information studies and philosophy, and originally I went into philosophy and worked on philosophy of science originally in Pittsburgh, by the way. So I was at the center there almost 30 years ago. And then I got into business ethics somehow because it seemed to be more, I'd say, profitable, worthwhile, valuable at the time. Eventually, when all these discussions about, digital ethics started more than 10 years ago, or when it got more intense, and then came AI ethics. I was invited to a few committees and ethics committee for autonomous driving, for example, and others, and so eventually this is how I got into this AI ethics and could also combine my former information studies and philosophy background more, and so in 2019 we opened this Institute for Ethics in AI. And I think it's very interesting to see how the discussions have developed already and matured, I would say, since then. And we have come from the more general abstract AI principles to the more specific ones for specific tools and specific systems, and then to a discussion that has gone more to into the governance and legal level. And I think at the moment we're at a point where it's kind of turning back into more ethics, more responsible AI without necessarily being legally binding. And I think it's very interesting, and I think the business ethics coming more into it, and the leadership question as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And so now I'm going to ask a very open question, and I would ask all of you to be very honest, because as Professor Lütke said at the beginning, we're also here to debate, and we're here to disagree, and we're here to try to be critical, and criticality goes through disagreement. I'm not expecting you to fight, though. But the question is, from your perspectives, very diverse perspectives, what are we missing right now in the responsible AI discussions? What is the blind spot? And I'm sure there are many. So, do you want to go first?
Okay. So, in fact, this topic is very important regarding responsible AI. And I really loved the opening speech of the chair of the conference. So, let's take it from another angle, okay? Let's not discuss all the keywords, fairness, transparency, ethics, and so many other things that everyone is aware of. So if we analyze the history, we can say that humanity throughout the history has made a great progress in science, in technology, in engineering. But on the other side, I don't think that we have made the same progress in humanities and social norms and inclusion and diversity. And here, if we can take just one example, I will take it from the Global South perspective, because you know that at Amerikahaus we are trying to promote AI from this perspective. Let's take the first founded university in the world that still exists until now. It is in Fez, in Morocco. In fact, it was built more than 1,000 years ago, but the most fascinating thing is not this university, which is really ancient and old. The most fascinating thing is that the person who built and founded this university is a woman, who was Fatima al-Fihriya. So when I'm thinking of history and what is happening right now, even though we have made a lot of progress in science and technology, how society at that time accepted to have a woman as a leader. And this is something very important. If we can just take few statistics, how many leaders are as a CEOs in AI companies, in big tech companies, in universities, and so on and so forth. So this is something really important that I would like to start with. And here, regarding your question, what is really missing in the responsible AI? I think that we can extend our vision to different parts of the world. So as the chair of the conference told us to be bold and talk about different things. So if we take, for example, the global north countries, okay? They have so many good values that we all agree on, like privacy. We talk a lot about privacy, individual rights, and so on and so forth. But from the other side, for example, in the global south, we have other perspectives. We focus much more on the community, on the responsible communities, on the family, on the group. So I'm not just here to defend one side or the other, but let's not talk about global north or global south. Let's talk about the global world. What is missing and how we can, for example, take advantage from these kinds of values like solidarity. And also there is something very important, that we can consider the whole world as a single body. If there is a part that can suffer, that means that the system hasn't succeeded. And I think that this is one thing that I would like to share with you that is really missing in the responsible AI discussion.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. I have a lot of follow-ups for right after, but Anne-Elisabeth, do you want to jump in? What do you think is missing? What is the blind spot?
Right. It seems to me that today we assume, in a way, when we are speaking about responsible AI, we are missing and assuming that we live in a flat world full of global standards about what responsible AI means, what harms mean, who is responsible. But it seems to me that the blind spot is really about asymmetry. And there is also, I mean, obviously an asymmetry in space. That means that we don't see the data with the same eye. We don't have the same standards. We don't have the same values. We don't have the same regulation capacity. But also, there is also for me a time asymmetry, a temporal asymmetry, meaning that AI is accelerating the decision making, the production, the education, the relation to power, and the relation to time. And so it's not just a question of technology, it's also the question of our institutions being able to adjust to this new pace, right? And so in 5 years for AI is huge. And for us, especially for the time for a parliament, it's nothing. So we have to take into account this temporal asymmetry as well. And so it seems to me that we should think about the ways of considering the uneven conditions of the global world, especially regarding the time. And yeah.
Thank you very, very much. Thomas.
What is missing? Yeah, my point, my argument would be, in some ways it relates to what Christoph said earlier, that AI is and will be biased, so it will not be neutral. Why is AI not neutral? Mohammed said, people make these decisions, and essentially, if you look at who makes the decisions, it's developers, it's the upper echelon in organizations. What is being developed, what not. The workforce in AI, broadly speaking, 85% male. So, we need a female perspective on this, which includes community and the ones that are not involved. But we also need to unpack how and why decisions are being made. And if you look at who is making those decisions, then you have an interesting group of people, 20, 30, 40-year-old billionaires, many of them socially awkward, who sort of make decisions on behalf of mankind. Why are they making decisions on behalf of mankind? We look at the market capitalization of the big tech companies, and this includes NVIDIA, chip maker, and OpenAI, and others. NVIDIA's market capitalization is $5 trillion. It just surpassed $5 trillion. How much is $5 trillion? Well, The size of the German economy, the whole of the German economy, is 4.4 trillion. So there you have it. So what's happening there? If you compare, economists may say, well, you can't really compare GDP to market capitalization. Well, it's an interesting way of actually looking at this. You'll see that of the 15 largest economies in the world, 5 are tech companies, and only 10 are nation states. So what's happening there is a tremendous power shift away from nation states to corporates. This has been a trend that's been around for a long time. 15 years ago, we had about 50 of the world's largest economies being companies. Now we're sitting at 70, and of the top 15, as I said, 5 are tech companies. So what we're seeing is an increasingly a shift towards the corporate sector with largely unchecked power, but at the same time, because of the market valuations, with sheer unlimited economic means to spend. So where is this heading, right? So now you take into account the 30, 40-year-old social geeks, it becomes more interesting still, because then you have all the issues around motivation and mindset. So what drives these people? Well, it's to be the first, to succeed in the game, to have the defining technology. So it's kind of a hyper competition that has evolved over time. At the same time, you have the motivations which are sometimes, let's say, obscure. There are people in the sector who believe in hyperstition, essentially, that we all subsumers should submit ourselves to technology, sort of as a religion, if you like. And there's a small fraction that actually promotes ideas of technofascism, which is just completely different discussion, but it's kind of one that's sort of at the fringes, if you will, of the whole thing. So we have to actually question those motivations. We have to provide checks and balances. And how do we do this? Well, my main point there would be we need to create checks and balances for the leaders, the ones who make decisions, so the upper echelon in these organizations, and we don't have them. They're largely gone. What is also not happening is we don't rarely very ever see responsible agency in these companies because of the hyper competition. No one wants to lose out. Notable exception in recent months has been Dario Amodei with Anthropic. Finally, someone standing up. Now you can say, well, they're still wanting to be the first, and maybe they know they have the best technology. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. Point is, what he exercised was a really interesting case of, you can call it intelligent self-binding, saying we're not going to go further, we're not going to reveal this to the military, we're not going to make everything available, because we need to have to set ourselves these guardrails. And setting yourself guardrails is this element, I think, that's really important when it comes to leadership. It's intelligent self-binding. Aristotle would say self-constrained. That always sounds a bit maybe too restrictive, but I think this is a debate that we are missing. So we're missing a debate around the leaders in the industry, the ones who make the decisions, not just the developers, but the upper guys at the upper echelon in these organizations. And we're missing a debate around how we can actually design systems or leadership approach that makes sure that we have AI for good and not AI for profit only, because that's the debate that's happening right now, and it's gearing very clearly towards profit rather than good.
Thank you very much. That's, again, very interesting. I kept taking notes. If you see me on my phone, I'm not like texting, I'm actually noting. Professor Oetker, do you want to also give your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to pick up on the last sentence you said, because from a business ethics perspective, something can be for good and for profit. It can be both. And so I think what is missing from a lot of conversations is that AI is challenging perspectives in a fundamental sense. I think this has been mentioned by a couple of you already. it challenges perspectives in the sense of, for example, particular regions of the world which are not maybe not sufficiently represented in those discussions, certain angles that we don't see. We will face leadership questions. We will have other blind spots, but I think we also should recognize more that it challenges perspectives in those countries which think they are totally fine and well off and don't need to change anything. And I'm just picking one particular country, and that's Germany, and because. I mean, you can talk about the American leaders, but you can also look at countries like Germany, where still we have trouble recognizing the point that there is a fundamental shift going on, and I think that it has not been recognized enough. Maybe in the just recent year, maybe some of these recognitions haven't taken place more, and on the political level, I'm not sure at all. And just to give you one example why you see this. So we're coming, of course, from academia, and we're doing research, and there is in the biggest research funding is the German Excellence Initiative, which probably many of you know or not. There are currently 70 excellence clusters being funded by German government money. Each of these clusters is about 30 million, I think, and they are supposed to be at the forefront of research. So, how many of these clusters would you think are about AI? And so this is from the recent round of initiatives which took place last year. So I really looked it up, and I was really surprised. Those are 2. And if you are a bit more generous with the count, you might arrive at 4. But it's 4 out of 70. In all the others, there might be some AI elements here and there, but it's not central to the point, central to the research topics in those clusters. And I think this is something where we have to question ourselves here in this country, in this research environment, saying, are we doing enough? So are we doing the right thing? Are we looking at the right questions, which are the questions that are challenging in this time? And I think more could be done in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if I summarize a little bit everything I've heard, and I'm not sure that's going to be very easy, but I can see that we have a trend. We're talking a lot about something relating to powers, right? So power asymmetries seem to be a big topic of who has the power, who kind of imposes on others, who is not heard, who doesn't have the power, why, right? Why and how? Also, do we care enough, right? Or do we show by giving money to research, for instance, that we care enough? So now following up on that, how would you fix it? What would you want in an ideal world, let's say 40 years from now, because it always takes time to implement things, and we're in Germany, so we're very aware of that. But if you had to have one thing, 2 things happen to make the ideal world, what would it be in terms of responsible AI, of course? Who wants to start? You want to go?
In fact, Oksana, you remembered me. I remembered the ideal city of Plato. Okay, that Farabi thereafter called it the virtuous city. So this is something really important to think of. And what is the ideal city in the context of AI? I think that the first thing that we have to start with, again, is to have this plurality alignment. Okay, we don't have to see AI from one side or from one single angle. And this is very important, as I already said before, that in Africa, for example, there is one famous quote that says, I am because we are. So this is related to collective responsibilities. And also, I don't think that actually we should build 21st century's AI with the 20th centuries social norms. We have to evolve. We have to evolve in terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion. We have to have this global approach, this global perspective, where everyone should find himself. And because I love history, I can't mention someone who is inventor and scientist. I'm not sure if you know him. He's called Al-Jazari. Al-Jazari. You know that AI was coined as a term, as a scientific term in 1956 by John McCarthy. But the discipline existed before this term. The term was coined in 1956 by John McCarthy in the Dartmouth Conference. But you know that Alan Turing defined AI by the Turing test and so many other things. But what we have to know is that 1,000 years ago, there is someone who called Al-Jazari, who built the first mechanical robot, because all the robots actually are electrical. Okay? What was fascinating is not the ingenuity of Al-Jazari in building this robot or machine. What was fascinating, you can write Al-Jazari and you will find the elephant clock. It is a machine, it is a robot that gather so many different civilizations. The first one is the Indian elephant. The second one is the Chinese dragon. The third one is the Persian phoenix, like you know, the mythical bird, and also the engineer of Greek antiquity. So what I would like to say, this ideal world, as you defined, Oksana, is that I see AI bringing all these civilizations, bring on everyone in the same, I would say, the AI tool or the AI system. It will not be like the elephant clock of Al-Jazari, because it was just symbolic, but these kinds of diversity will be included within these AI systems in such a way that everyone could find himself.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And actually, initially I study robotics, so that reminded me of a lot of very cool things. You should look it up. It's very, very cool. Jump in, Anne-Elisabeth. What would be your fixing it?
Right. It's a huge word, fixing it, right? We are speaking about AI. It seems to me that the challenge today is not so much technical, it's rather political. And so I just agree with what we all said before in saying that we need our disagreement to be productive. So that means that we have to listen more, to accept co-authorship. But it seems to me that we also need something like adaptive governance. So meaning that we have to consider the possibility of doing and redoing and reconsidering our governance tools. And so one example of it is really the way we conceive the IEAI Act, which has been set all in marble as the first one. Yes, but with, it seems to me, difficulties to adjust through time, to adjust to LLM when they were published as new tools, and today issues regarding agentic AI, right? I'm not so sure about the American ways of doing governance, but the approach taken by the NIST, where we have to redo again and again, reconsider the tools, might be something that we want to look at in order to adjust to the time and the temporal asymmetry I was speaking about.
Thank you. It's also, it's a completing point, I think. It's very interesting. Thomas.
Yeah, I always feel inspired looking back. So my mom mentioned the Greek history. Let me bring in Renaissance history, so Italy. So if you look at, for those who have been in the municipal hall in Siena in Italy, in Tuscany, there's a very famous painting there by Ambrogio Lorenzetti showcasing the good and the bad government. And it's probably one of those unique, frescoes that speaks to so many issues that are really timeless. But what stands out for the good government is kind of it sums up, I suppose, this idea of civic republicanism, right? So you need individuals who are virtuous without necessarily making sacrifices, but it's about being a good person, right? A good agent, if you like. You need organizations who function well and who enable responsible decision making, and you need a governance system that actually oversees all of this. So the ideas I think that we need to look at are, and I agree with that assessment, are not new in a sense. We've known them all along, and we have debated them up and down in business ethics for many years. But we rarely look at this because our world tends to become, it's increasingly complex. It's a world of contested values, but we try as humans to compartmentalize. So, we either talk about individual responsibility or we talk about the big governance question. So if you look at the AI discussion for many, many years now, and it has been a super important discussion because it was about the bigger principles. We need those. The EU AI Act is still the most far-sighted document in that sense. Australian AI Act is not bad either. Singapore has a pretty good system in place. But the most we get out of these are these legally binding declarations at the very end of the main actors. But this has been a result of, in a way, a democracy at work. So a multi-stakeholder exercise. And that's a very important lever, a very important layer. But that's a macro level. At the meso level, we need the organization. So what we need to do is enabling organizations to, or essentially remind them of their responsibility when it comes to AI, as those companies who are the main engine and provide the sort of economic engine, but also the finances to do this. That this is about a balance between profit and purpose, or AI for good and AI for profit. If there's no profit in AI, no one would invest in it. So that's also what we need. So the macro level essentially will increasingly debate probably the idea that because AI is emerging as some form of super intelligence, no longer just artificial intelligence, but super intelligence replacing human intelligence, we need to really seriously talk about the principles that set guardrails. For the organizations who are driving and thriving because of profit, we need to remind them that that there should be boundaries, and that this is about value alignment between profit and the technology and purpose of the technology. But we also need to start talking, as I mentioned earlier, about the individuals. And this is, in a way, where how responsible leadership comes in. So responsible leadership, which is my domain, is a multi-stakeholder. So we were the first ones to argue 20 years ago. It's been 20 years now. That leadership actually needs to move away from the diet, between the leader and the follower, to actually open itself up to a stakeholder context. Because many of the strategic leaders, much of their time is actually engaging with all kinds of stakeholders, not so much with direct followers. So the leadership research is very much flawed in that direction and biased. So we need to open that discussion and think about this. And if we do, we'll find that we have a more complex and a multi-level perspective on leadership, macro, meso, micro level. And if we bring those labels together, I think, and start that discussion, okay, voila, what are the responsibilities of individuals, the decision makers in organizations? How can we help them to make better decisions and remind them to set themselves guardrails, bind themselves to norms and values? How can we help organizations and incentivize organizations to drive innovation? We need that in Germany. But at the same time, enable them to make profit. And what are the principles we need at the macro level to actually embed all this in a properly functioning system? Then I think we're getting somewhere, but we actually have to look at, and leadership has to look at that sort of full complexity of it, breadth, width, and depth, if you like, of leadership. So I think that's missing still. I think essentially it's a debate about agency. I mean, Floridi has made this point for years, Luciani Floridi, around what we need to do is, when it comes to responsible AI, we need to talk about this. We have to think of this as a new form of agency. And so we need to start defining what responsible agency here means. And by and large, these are individuals who make those decisions. So let's do this.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I've seen you react, Mohammed. Do you want to jump in and answer this?
Yes, I would like to jump on this regarding strategy and vision, because in fact at Amerikahaus we have studied more than 40 AI strategies around the world. And honestly, we found that the German one was really good, because when we analyzed these strategies, we read the report published in 2018, I think. What the German did is that they analyzed all the previous strategies and they criticized them. They found that most of the AI strategies are based on what we call input indicators, not output indicators. And what you did is really, really different from the others. And I have read the strategy, it's well established, and we have learned a lot of things from that. What I would like to add also, if you allow me, Oksana, is that in fact there is a big issue here regarding AI, because you know that AI is a multi-purpose technology that can be used in every sector. Can you imagine any sector where AI cannot be applied in? You cannot find it. Okay, just think of that. Agriculture, healthcare, finance, every sector. So I think that the big mistakes that nations and states and countries did is that they want to succeed at all these levels, in all these sectors, and they will not gain a competitive advantage. So if we have to gain in terms of sovereignty, we have to focus on 1, 2, or 3 sectors when we can gain competitive advantage in order to compete with others. And I can add so many other things later.
Thank you very much. Well, that's very interesting. Anne-Elisabeth, do you have also something to add to this?
Yes, Mike. I wanted to add that the question of the stakeholders is one of the biggest one. Who do we want to have in the room in order to develop an adjusted answer in terms of governance, in terms of advancement of the technology as well. We need to have and to multiply the possibilities of having a lot of stakeholders around in the room and at the table for negotiation. So it's not just the question of the state responsibility or the local institution responsibility. It's also how to give, we have the possibilities for the companies and the businesses to raise their voices, but also the students to raise their voices. They have something to say about what is going on. They are much more involved than we are. And so giving and having them the possibility of making, even in the international organizations, student communities represented and having a way to participate and to be taken into consideration is something that we have to think of.
Thank you very much. Yes, Professor Lütger, let you jump in now with first what you think, right? And then maybe a reaction to what was just said.
Right. So, I mean, I would add one thing, and that's the jump from theory to practice. Because also the AI strategy in 2018, the German, it was theory. It was not necessarily all put into practice, or not, maybe not enough. When we set up this institute 7 years ago, one thing was important for me when it came to responsible AI or AI ethics as well, is that this is not just a high-level discussion. This is not just about a philosophy that you put on the wall, but it's something that needs to go into the development teams in the companies, in organizations. Responsible AI is often not just about these high-level questions, but about detailed questions about how to program this system, this tool, more in that way or in that way. For example, we had these in our research groups when it came to autonomous driving, and we were working together with the people from the automotive technology, and there were a lot of questions which were just not just technical ones. And in order to solve these, you needed to have some input from the from the non-tech side, basically the ethics side, or others too, of course. And so that's what I think is very important, and what I would still like to see more also in your work that you are doing, like integrating more of these responsible AI questions into the real tech development, into those groups, those teams that are developing the technology.
Thank you. And actually that links very well because, again, I'm looking at all my notes together, and what pops to me is, this relates very well to the project that we have at the Institute, right? The alignAI project. Most of the team is here. We discussed value alignments, right? We discussed for whom, but also who is involved. We discussed power imbalance. And the alignAI project is a full interdisciplinary team of 16 PhD students doing a lot of different things and trying to understand each other and to develop actual tools in the end. They're doing a great job. But so that kind of, in a way, is a beginning, maybe, of how to go about it. I have to say, it's not a very often time that you see those very interdisciplinary projects, like Professor Gu was saying. We also have Franziska Postler at the end of the room here, who was actually the researcher on the autonomous driving project that did a very good job at doing ethics with technical. But then, so if we go back to the question of power, because I think that's, I think it's a very interesting one. How then do you kind of, in the world of today, right, how genuinely would you redistribute the power? How can you, right? Because if the power is as it is right now, it's because of the structures. So of course I'm asking you a bit of a hard exercise. It is completely criticizing the current system. But if anyone has an idea, how would you fix it, right? This bit of power imbalance. How do we go further? Thomas? Yeah.
Okay, happy to start. Look, you mentioned the multi-stakeholder perspective. I think we have a fantastic tool, ideally, which is called the deliberative democracy, right? So essentially, I think we should think about revitalizing the ideas of deliberative democracy. So, you know, the 7th most important philosopher in the world just passed away, so Jürgen Habermas. There's a ranking there of, you know, and he came up among the top 10, the only living philosopher to be up there at the time. As the co-architect of discourse ethics, I think he had a lot to say about the powers of democratic participation and democratic engagement and democratic dialogue. So I think we need to look back at the sources and also to start, you know, revitalize ideas around deliberative democracy. This will not be easy because what we have right now is, as I said earlier, is this sort of hyper-competitive environment in which many of these actors, main actors, companies, are very protective of their proprietary technology, not surprisingly. So how do we, you know, create more open access to technology is one of the critical issues potentially. To elaborate, this will not be easy. You know, no one wants to have a sort of a superimposed state system running these types of decisions. This would run counter to the idea of capitalism in the first place. But questions have to be asked, and so I think it can happen at multiple levels. I think one good starting point would be, and we have tried to get this up, people don't really get it, I think, at this point, would be a dialogue across sectors, across fields, across a variety of you know, stakeholder groups on the purpose and the future of technology, and ask questions, as you say. I mean, we have to ask critical questions. Why is that important? Because sometimes asking a critical question is more important than the solution. It's about, you know, listening and asking the right question. If people stop asking questions, then we end up and you know, we end up having issues and problems, and it happen again and again. The most famous business ethics cases have always been cases where people didn't ask questions. Right. Those in power didn't ask questions anymore. And so that's really, really important. So the question, I think, will be for the next few years to in a way think about how we can bring democratic ideas into the discourse on responsible AI and facilitate these types of dialogues where those questions are being asked, where we, try to maybe work collaboratively on meaningful guardrails and, future sort of direction of AI. No one really knows where this is going. All we know is it's happening very, very fast. And I think that to me is also concerning, the speed that we see. So we just can't really keep up anymore. I mean, and of course, democracy is not efficient. This is why these people flirt with ideas of fascism or dominance, because democracy always comes into the way. No one wants that. It's not efficient.
Depends what you qualify as the success.
Yes, exactly. It depends what's at the at the end of the project there. So I think this is some uncomfortable debates, but I think ultimately it comes down to the very same sort of themes. But we have to start acting because it's moving so fast.
Right.
That's become quite frightening. And the debate around, we have debates here at the conference over the next 2 days on autonomous weapon systems and, and basically delegating all the decision-making capability to the system. No human being involved, and that's for the military progress, but for a critical, democratically minded citizen, quite concerning.
Very concerning, yes. One of you wanted, okay, whoever first.
So I think that usually we think that philosophical questions and philosophy in general is theory. That's really important to mention. But do you know that most of philosophical questions are really involved in this AI wave? And I will give you a few examples. For example, the tram dilemma or the train dilemma, where there is, for example, a train and there is 5 people here and another one, and he has to choose which way he will adopt. So this is the same. This is not theory, because with self-driving cars, we'll face these situations. And there is a website published by MIT, which is called Moral Machines, when they give you so many different situations with kids and women and people, and you have to answer these questions. So that was just a subject and topic limited to philosophy, and now we are practicing it inside AI. I think also that we are at the beginning of this AI wave. And there are so many other things that will happen, and no one can say what will happen in the future with certainty. So we have to make a decision in the fuzzy world. We are not in a deterministic world. We have to train the future generations with different skills, because it's time to change, I think, our philosophy. You know that philosophers are great in asking questions, and scientists are great in responding, answering these questions. So instead of only looking for answers to existing questions, it's time to ask new questions that have not been asked before. And I think that this will be the real challenge. The most challenging things in the future will be regarding philosophy and ethics and so many important things. You know that Anthropic, for example, they have hired one philosopher, which brings all these values inside the cloud and many other tools. So it's time to get back to humanities and not separate technology from humanities. Also, there is something else that I would like to add, but maybe, okay. Also, there is one keyword that is repeated regarding sovereignty. So every state, every company, every organization is trying to keep its sovereignty. And I think that sovereignty is something very important, but it does not mean isolation and enclosed on themselves without collaborations. And unfortunately, we are witnessing, I think, in my opinion, an unethical AI race around the globe. There are states and companies that would like to win the AI race. I think that we have to change the questions, not who will win the AI race, but what will be the benefit for humanity. We are all on the same boat, and we have to succeed together. So this is the second point that I would like to share, and I have so many others that I can share later.
Thank you very much. Anne-Elisabeth.
Yes, it seems to me that the question of the arena is very important, and we will have, I think, in July, the first global AI dialogue by the United Nations. But we don't know yet if something will come out of it, right? And so, I mean, having these discussions is obviously crucial, but we also, I suppose, need to consider the shift in the questions that we are asking. It's not just a question of the ethics of the technology, it's also the question of the environment, the ecosystem. So who are we ready for that? Meaning, who has the infrastructures? Who owns the data? Who has the capacity of making the audit? When we think about human agency, who is responsible for that, right? And so it's also a full amount of questions that are not really technical, which are not really dedicated to the technology, but all the environment, all the surroundings. And we need to focus on that as well. And I suppose that the debate in the next few years, because of the pace of AI and the speed, as you were mentioning, the questions are really operational on this environment, on this ecosystem. And as long as we don't know that and we don't bring this question to the debate, we will miss the point.
Right. Thank you. Yes, yes. And also turning this conversation again towards something more practical, right?
Operational.
Operational. So we really have this continuum in the conversation. Professor, did you want to jump in with some addition to this?
Maybe just a brief one, because I think what is needed, what we have done here in a few projects, is also this really intercultural perspective. And for example, in the autonomous driving, in one of those that we have been running here, we looked at it from different ethical perspectives, and what difference would, first, the traditional perspectives, like you look at it from a Kantian ethics perspective, you look at it from a utilitarian perspective, a virtue ethics perspective, but also, this was in a different project, true, but for example, we had projects with Ubuntu ethics, like African-based Ubuntu ethics, and what would that mean for an ethical perspective on AI or certain AI systems, and we had a number of conversations with Asian centers in different countries, as well as other parts of the world, US and South America too, and I think this is important to see in what the different perspectives really mean in this sense, so not just theoretically from let's say from a traditional point of view, but from a multicultural perspectives.
Thank you. Yes, Thomas, jump in.
Yeah. Just adding to that one, I think it's an interesting. So obviously, we in Australia are very much working on reconciliation with indigenous communities, and you open every meeting, every conference with a statement to honor and pay the respect. What's interesting is what we have tried is, so I've been trying for 2 years now to bring indigenous ideas into MBA teaching, and that's actually quite interesting. But people are quite open and they get it, and most of our MBA is actually a bit older anyway, so they know and see the relevance. So if you look at indigenous thinking and these ideas, you'll find that they are quite timeless in a sense, but they have some interesting domains that we seem to have lost sight of. One is a very, very prominent notion on stewardship, essentially long-term thinking. 7 generations backward, 7 generations forward. And they do that actively. So if you do this, do the equation, that's a long time. So there's no short-termism in indigenous thinking, no short-termism. The second one is the importance of community and relationships. Right? So relationality is all about relationality, how you belong, where you belong to, be kind to guests, and so on and so forth. So relationality and you said, I mean, we're all in the same boat. So, you know, we all depend on this future dominated by AI. So we all should have a say, and we all should be engaged in it. So relationality. And a very strong notion of kinship, which in a way to me translates also in the importance of community, which was mentioned a few times, and humanity more broadly. So what AI cannot do very well these days is human reasoning, imagination, ideation. It's excellent as a research assistant, it's excellent in editing capacity, but it fails so far, at least, on other domains. And we've all tried this probably. But the human reasoning element, there's something very unique there. And who knows, maybe they can start to replicate this. I doubt they can. But that, I think, is something that we should keep in mind. And so the question, and I had a long conversation, I just come from Barcelona where I spent a lot of time, 6 years as a professor. And I talked to one of my friends and colleagues who's a priest, and he said, I'm not interested in the applications. They don't interest me. I'm interested in the foundational piece, the foundational values, you know. Why are we doing this? What are we missing? What may we losing down the road? And how can we make this a more humanistic endeavor, a more humanistic project? So we have to start thinking and articulating, and indigenous ideas may actually be quite helpful to start articulating this as a humanistic endeavor. And in a way, it happened in the early days of the discussion, you know, the early discussion around, you know, OpenAI. OpenAI was founded with a humanistic mission to a certain extent. Why did they lose sight? Well,
I have an opinion about
yes,
that.
there's a few. Because some people, you know, saw the dollar signs, literally. And big egos in place, and, you know, people are become very ambitious. You know, Sam Altman, OpenAI CEO, wasn't very technically savvy to begin with, but he became very astute as sort of the key driver, the key kingmaker, the key relationship builder in the industry, hence his success. He's not the technological wizard, but he's good at other things, and people believed in him. So that's why I got all the venture capitalists to you know, buy into him, if you will, and OpenAI. And of course, we have all seen the struggle between the huge egos between Sam and Elon Musk recently. But you know, the humanistic element there, which was there in the beginning 10 years ago or so, has gone missing, and I think it's time to revitalize that discussion.
Thank you. And so, can we also say that what's missing in responsible AI right now is maybe humility, right? There's a lot of people with a big lack of humility in this sector that make a lot of decisions for others, and forget a little bit what, for instance, was the original idea. Because I think OpenAI is not the only one that had a good intention at first.
Sorry, my tendency to, no, I've just one thought there, because I think what's also not, and it comes back to the mindset, you know, what are the mindsets? So it's not just you know, the technological wizardry here, but there's also a shared ethos in the industry that it's okay to break things.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's not good either. So that's something to watch, right? So if you look at how this works, well, it's perfectly fine to break things, but we don't want to break things with and through this type of, you know, highly capable technology. So I think there's something there that actually cries out for guardrails more than we probably would have thought.
But maybe one, I mean, we need to break things. This reminds me of Schumpeter's creative destruction. Of course, I mean, market economy is about creative destruction, and creating is important. I think we need to see where we have new technologies that have just been created, and Gen AI has been around for not even 4 years. So, I mean, I think it's not surprising that people are thinking, well, this is really great. This is something that has been achieved. So, yeah, but creative destruction, I think, is the creative part should not be overlooked.
Anne-Elisabeth, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I was going back to question of humility.
Yeah.
It seems to me that when we consider the question of responsible, we have this question of humility on the backside of the discourse or reasoning. When we are speaking about AI, not responsible AI, but just a technology, I'm not sure that it is compatible. So, yeah.
That's super interesting. Thank you. Okay, now I'm seeing the time, and I want to be sure that we have a bit of a Q&A. So I'm going to ask you here if there is any question that I haven't asked that you want to ask, any of the panelists, all of them, any debate you want to raise, anything. And I'll give my mic to David that will run around the room for us. There is a question in the back.
Sorry, there's no running.
Hi, thank you. The question I have is that we hear a lot about the human side of AI and the need for responsible humanity, which to me seems a social issue. But I think what we're missing, or what is missing, is a psychological impact, the individual impacts of AI. And that's not really talked about, and it's not really discussed. So what are your thoughts on that?
Anyone who wants to take the psychological impact? Anyone has an opinion? Yeah, Thomas?
Well, I have a few views, I think, on this. I think if I interpret your question correctly, then I think you're thinking about the psychological impact of AI on everyday humans. Yeah. So what it does to us, so to speak. And I think, absolutely agreed. I mean, there's very little other than reported instances where, obviously we all have seen this, if you look at the development, for example, in AI and chatbots and how this has morphed. I had a student recently completing a thesis on grief bots, right? So grief bots are interesting in a sense that they basically create, or you have the ability to create virtual representation in the afterlife. So someone who's passed or deceased, and you kind of continue to have that connection. And my first question, obviously, asked was, well, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, what about stages of grief? We are supposed to move on at some point. So what does this do? So there's an immediate psychological impact. You could say, well, in the short run, it may be really good to have the ability to perhaps have your own personal grief board if someone passes. But what about after that? There's a much bigger discussion around romantic AI. Right? There's a lot of people who have tried this and use sort of all kinds of offerings in sort of romantic AI. So even those two applications we can see have immediate psychological impact. Next to the constant, it never stops. I mean, that's the other piece. For me, it's a much broader issue that AI never stops. So there's always something to be done, and we're constantly, at the receiving end of AI outputs. So I think this constant 24/7 involvement without being able to keep up is another one.
I think the question is also, is it at all even thought about in responsible AI? Because I can tell you that at the Institute we're thinking about it, because this question is a bit biased. I'm a psychologist, and that's actually my project. So I am defining the psychological impacts of AI systems. But I'm not a panelist, so I'm not going to say more than that. Everything's on the website.
No, but that's your topic, so I think you should say something about
but it is definitely not considered. It is mentioned. We talk about manipulation. Thank you, Caroline. We talk about manipulation. We talk about bias. We talk about a lot of things in governance and in practice. But really, we have no benchmark to evaluate it properly. And I'm not the only psychologist in the team. We also have Simay Toklu that's also defining those things with us. And I think that's a lot of blah blah, not a lot of actual data. That's how I'm going to summarize that. So yes, it's missing. Thank you for saying it.
Yes, if I may, just a little story. 3 weeks ago in Atlanta, we had the second edition of the Atlanta AI Week, and I wanted to organize a panel of the human side of performance. So speaking, not about the AI performance, but about the human side of performance when we are in an AI-driven world. And I had to struggle and to fight, I suppose, 2 months to get this topic recognized. And finally, I was able to organize a panel, and we spoke about, how do we deal with the flow of information, with the necessity to take a decision log as fast as we can, and the impact of the infinite workday, as mentioned by the Microsoft report in 2025, in July 2025, beginning our days at 6 in the morning and finishing every day in very late in the evening. So this question of how do we, when we are not speaking about job displacements, we are still in the workload and we are still working with AI. What is the human side of the performance is something that is very difficult to see recognized today.
Thank you. Yes. Do we have another question?
Yeah, hello, I'm Philip. Very much thank you for all these interesting inputs. I was a little bit missing the word of AI agents and their role in this development, because AI is a technology that writes and innovates and researches itself. I mean, at the big labs, more than 50–60% of the actual work is actually done by the agents. So I would be interested in how that fits into your picture.
I think I'm very, very involved in these questions, and we have to dig into it very deeply. It's the reason why I'm speaking about the temporal asymmetry, because I see that with agent AI, we are evolving not on a yearly basis, but on a monthly basis. So I'm not sure about what will be there in 6 months. I was mentioning the fact that I applied for making a presentation at the University of Tours a few months ago. It was in November. The conference was scheduled in March, and my topic was about being an agent. Being a human. What does it mean to be a human in an agentic AI world? And I had to adjust the title of my presentation twice in 2 months to be up to date. So obviously, because we have an agent who just not reacts or answers, but is able to act, the pace and the speed of the development is very, going much further. And so the reason why we need to consider the question of the adaptive governance. So yes, this is the next topic that we have to focus on, much more than, I suppose, LLM.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else want
Okay, I would like to add something very important, maybe. Just let's not get to rely to keywords of AI, because we are talking now about agentic AI, we are talking about AI agent. Before that, we talked about generative AI. Before that, we talked about predictive AI. You know that there is the most famous book on AI was written by Stuart Russell. He was one of our guests at Morocco AI. The book contains more than 1,000 pages. Okay, and the chapter of neural network, which is the basis of all this deep learning, all generative AI, was only 10 pages. So we have just to know, it is important to understand that AI changed its tools, but the philosophy and the approach keep the same.
Thank you.
Just a brief one. I think for me, what stands out are 2 elements. One, I think, is the paradigm behind this. So I think the interesting debate for me is whether the industry will shift towards world models. And so that means sort of accurate representation, actually, of the complexity out there, rather than this constant training on, agentic data, which, experiments, and as the other piece actually have shown, is not very helpful, because we have exhausted real-life data. So now what's happening is especially based on a synthetic base, and if you train agents and bots on synthetic data, what you find is that over time, the quality of the data decreases, and decreases rapidly. So they've run all kinds of experiments on this, and so that's not very promising, as opposed to real-world representation, which are at the heart of world models. So I think, and there's some prominent voices in the field to make the case that the only way forward for AI would be, and indeed to create some form of humanistic sort of responsible AI, would be one that actually looks at world model and that sort of broader representation and sort of the actual sort of relational networks that are involved. So I think that to me stands out from agentic perspective.
Thank you. No? Okay, good.
I have the mic. This is a question for the ethicist in the panel. So in your opinion, what is the current landscape of AI ethics washing, both on the corporate world and perhaps also on the academic world?
That will be me. I think one of the problems the ethicists, I mean, Christoph said, look, there's been, people did talk about this all the time and look at, previous concepts and ideas, and I think this is a really important one. I don't see a lot of traction currently. I mean, people tend to focus on, oh, this is an interesting phenomenon, and then zoom in on that one and try to explain it either through existing theories or, in terms of outcomes of that particular phenomenon. So I think what we need to do is we need to sort of think about, I suppose, or start that discussion around what is the role of ethics here? What's the importance of ethical ideas? And there are a few people who have done this, but I don't see a lot of action, to be honest. I think we're missing out on this because it may be because philosophy tends to be quite slow to get to terms with these sort of new challenges, particularly when it comes to technology. I personally think we don't need probably not a new theory to explain AI, because AI has been around for a long time, since the 60s, essentially. It's nothing new. But we need to revitalize, reignite perhaps, a debate that we haven't had for years or decades, which is at the interface of risk and ethics. How do we engage with the technology? And it, harks into the debate around existential risk. There's a group of people out there who think about AI as purely as an existential risk. But it's a bit like, nuclear and other types of, high-risk technologies. If you engage in that discussion, I think there has been very little debate at the interface of existential risks and ethics and how we sort of engage with this type of technology, who should be involved, where do we set boundaries, when do we say we stop and not. So I think there's a lot more that needs to happen in that realm. But this is a great question.
I mean, I would not necessarily look just in philosophy for it. It is happening elsewhere. That's why we also call this a responsible AI forum. It's not a philosophical AI ethics forum or something. So a lot of the responsible AI, trustworthy AI, and other concepts like that work is not, it's being done in computer science, in other technical disciplines, as we'll see, many people sitting here working on these questions. So I would, I think we see quite a lot of it, because people are recognizing, those people from tech are recognizing that a lot of the questions they need to solve in developing the systems are non-technical questions, and so that's where it comes in. But if you were to look in philosophy for it, so one example is that 2 years ago we had the World Congress of Philosophy again. This is only happening every 5 years. This was in Rome, and for the first time it had an ethics of AI section, and I had the pleasure to chair it, and it was quite big. It was one of the largest sections of the Congress, at least from the applied perspective. And this shows that there is a lot of interest, and it's on the academic side, it's on the theoretical side, but it's also there on the practical side. It's maybe not always under the same concept, it's not unified under the same umbrella, but I think there is much more than meets the eye maybe at first glance.
Do you want to jump in? Yes, just one comment. I think that in June 23rd and 24th, there will be a huge conference in Chicago on the responsible AI, and it is just for the businesses. How the big companies, it's not for our academics, just so 2 days on the strategies and the practical tools that are used by the companies in order to set up responsible AI strategies. What are they doing? What are their best practices? And so on and so forth.
So
that's the last question.
the last question.
And please, short answers.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a great panel. Just one question. We see that AI becomes more and more independent. And in the future, we may become, we will become more and more dependent on AI. The question is that this independence of AI, the AI makes decisions about a request that we make. The question is, at the end of the day, who is responsible of the independent decision that it takes? The regulators, governors, the people, the universities. Who is responsible at the end of the day for the independent decisions that we may take in the future?
Thank you. Short answers.
Sure. Yes. Well, I think it's a great question. No. No, but no. Seriously, I think this is a really serious question, and I think that to me, a short answer to this would be we have to explore new forms of theory that basically, have been emerging in the field around shared agency, for example, distributed agency, mostly around, Michael Bradman's work, Stanford and Margaret Gilbert work about the plural self in terms of political philosophy. So I think there's some really rich ideas there that could help us to define how shared agency works, where you sort of look at either humans, collectives, making decisions together, right? Or as some form of hybrid agency, which this may well turn out to be. So how is that going to work? And how far do we want to take it? And where do we draw the line? I think, so great question, absolutely.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think that the responsibility will be shared by different stakeholders and different actors. And by the way, this is what we call accountability. And it is studied in different universities. When we take, for example, a product of AI, there is a process of different steps from the creation of the product until the use of the product. The creation, the development, the use of the product and deployment of the product. So in the accountability process, there is a responsibility in each step. And we have already started worldwide working on this by defining the responsibility of each actor. And I think that things will be evolved in order to make clear.
Thank you.
I would have said that I hope that we are all responsible, but that, the question of the legal accountability is something which is much more difficult to settle.
Thank you. Final words?
Yeah, I think the organizational question is very important. As you said, there are questions of personal responsibility as well, but I think the organizational responsibility, the liability questions, and the redress mechanisms, those are, I think, the key ones.
Thank you very much. Okay, before we close, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping because I forgot to do it at the beginning. We're going to have a coffee break now that will last half an hour. You can get coffee at every coffee breaks. Please do not bring the cups in the rooms. That's a note I've been given by my office manager, so I'm just reporting it. For the lunch break, it's not going to be on site, so you can go and find food all over. There's a lot of places nearby. It's 1 hour. And I think that's it. And right now, therefore, is a networking time. So have fun, and thank you very much for your attention.